next, we're here with Darryl Johnson again, and we're going to talk about his piece, A Game of Chance. And what can you tell us up front about this piece?
The Game of Chance was commissioned by a consortium of schools, and I had pretty much a blank check. The only stipulations I had were that it needed to be based on the 12-bar blues format, and improvisation had to be a part of it. And the reason for that, both of those reasons were academic, because Dr. Copes, the commission lead, he wanted wind band students who weren't a jazz band to have exposure to two critical parts of our musical history and heritage, which is jazz. And, you know, if you're not in jazz band, you may never play 12-bar blues or come across it. And it really is a good educational opportunity for all students to understand a little bit about it. So the 12-bar blues is in there for that aspect. And then improvisation is also something that he wanted students to have a chance to do. Now, in this particular case, it's not just throw them out to the wind improvisation like it would be in a jazz band class. There are sample rhythms that students can use along with a box of individual notes that students can use with those rhythms. So, for instance, I may have G, B flat, C, D, and they have the rhythm. They can pick one or two of those notes and just start the rhythm, da 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 da, or three notes, da 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 da. And if you're not familiar with improvisation, but you want to get their feet wet in there, that's one way that they can do it, by just taking a couple notes, plugging them into an existing rhythm, and kind of seeing how it works. So that is what the piece is. It's 12-bar blues with 3 improvisational segments. And then it's called The Game of Chance because there's also several variations on the 12-bar blues that happen. So when you have that chord progression, you obviously don't want it to be just wall-to-wall 12-bar blues with nothing really changing. So one is the Funhouse variation, and it kind of has this wonky, warped mirror, Jack-in-a-Box vibe with kind of a darkened Funhouse. Then you have a Child's Play variation, which is my emulation of a child playing a wind band like they would play piano. So when kids at a piano, bum 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 bum. It's a wind band version of that. Another one is the post-rain variation, and it's kind of outside of a jazz band club, outside of a jazz club with maybe the wet New York pavement, the steam coming out of the sewers, some guy just sitting there, maybe with sax, and really low key. The Whipple Tree variation, a long trek across the country, Oregon Trail style, bleak, and you can hear the horse hoofs and the clacking of the machinery. The Rocket Fire variation, which is a war scene, and then there's the theme. And so that's kind of A Game of Chance in a nutshell.
Yeah, you have such clear, vivid imagery when you talk about these sections, both in Frontier Rising and now in this one. Does the music build the picture in your head, or does the picture build the music?
Well, either can happen, but in this case, the music built the picture. And so as I started writing it, I was like, what do I hear? And then you start to play toward that and then add things to go in that direction. But I definitely wanted, for a piece this length, about, I think it's 5 or 6 minutes, there to be plenty of variation. So each variation, even though it's based on 12-bar blues, does take a distinct turn. And that was my main focus, to make sure that the listener has a full adventure that is not too monotonous, hopefully.
So why do you think it would be important for a student to improvise?
My interest in that is less to do with them being able to sit in on a jazz band, and more in them tapping into the creativity that gets lost in a little bit of modern education, because as many have said, this is not a new thought, students are really taught to listen and repeat. I tell you this, you write that down, you pass. So creativity is a little bit lost in that when students are basically taught to do what they're told to do, and then that's how you succeed. And frequently, if you go to a class, and I've done this, I've had a student, I pick up your instrument and I say, play anything. And they'll go, and I say, there's no wrong answer, play anything. But like, what? Play anything you want, there's no wrong answer. But, and that spirit of creativity is totally dampened out at some point in the process. And so I think that students really need to have the ability to create, to interpret, to express. I have a piece called The Rescue, where there's solos in it that have no articulation, direction, dynamics, and the entire purpose is for the students to be forced to create an interpretation of this line. what is going to be long, what's going to be short, what's going to be long, loud, what's going to be soft, what's going to be trilled, anything that they want to do, they can do it. And my goal is for them to stretch those creative muscles and understand how it feels to bring something to life.
Do you have any recommendations for band directors that are a little less comfortable with improvisation?
Absolutely. So the score has some directions on teaching it. And the first thing I encourage you to do with the students is have them pick one note from the box, the notes that I provide, and then play that with a rhythm. Da, 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 da. Maybe they can pick one note per measure. Da, 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 and then they get comfortable doing that. Add two notes in. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Then they get used to that. Then add three notes. And it's unlikely, unless you're really into it, that they're ever going to just go from zero to full-blown jazz solo. But this is the foundation of it, and I'm okay with that. So starting with just one note and the rhythm, even as a teacher, you don't have to be familiar with jazz. They can manage that. And then just add two notes, and it builds on itself pretty easily, so you don't have to get into the weeds on that because there's strong guardrails.
One thing I love to do in my jazz band, when we first get into the 12-bar blues, and any improvisation for that matter, is I have each of my students improvise their name. And so they just think of, like, my name is Scott Lewis Cumero. And so I would say Scott Lewis Cumero. And there's a lot of different variations on my name. And then the next time we meet, I have them extend that improvisation of using their name over and over again in their head, but starting to use different notes. Again, trying to give them something they can be comfortable and familiar with before, because I think improvisation is big and scary, like for a lot of kids.
There's one tip I can give to teachers as well that seems to work, is if you have a shy group of students, have them all play the same note. So we're going to do B flat here, and then just play the rhythm as a class, ba ba da ba da, and then they all get used to doing it. And then it's not so much like they're the first person to break ground on that. And if you have the class doing it together and then isolate students, that seems to work. And then also starting with your students that you already know are not particularly shy, have them do it first, and they can lead the way. And then the students that are less inclined may be more inclined to follow after that.
So I'm going to eventually do an interview and a video with someone and talk about some basic things that you can do to get into improvisation. So people that are more interested, they can look out for that. Also, there's a great book by a guy, I think his name is pronounced Stephen Agrell. I think it's Aggrell. I'll put the link in the description below. But he has a book that's called Improvisation for Classical Musicians. It's filled with all the stuff. Like, I didn't come up with that name thing. I actually stole it from his book. And it's just all kinds of things that you could do with your students so that it's more fun. It's more like a game. It's less intimidating. All right, so let's take a look at a few pieces in Darryl's catalog. I went through it and I picked two pieces from every grade level. So I started with zeros and ones. And I actually think this is the first piece I listened to of yours back when we first connected for some reason. Oh, I know why. I had just started this year teaching beginning band. And I'm desperately trying to I'm trying to find things in that catalog that don't sound like every other thing. Which is, I know it's really hard, but I like this piece. It's 1 part per section. There's 4 percussion parts. It's 3 minutes long. I like that it's got a diverse articulation and dynamic, so that there's lots of things to work on in the piece with your students. One thing that I look for in this level of music is the trombone lines, and it's because I'm a trombone player. But there's a lot of real estate on that slide for a little beginner to be able to cover. And when I see composers that give kids B flat to C like over and over again, it's evil. I heard Philip Sparks speak once, and he was really passionate about getting more composers to write for this level of music. And so he was calling his composer friends up saying, "Hey, you got to do this." And his friend said no. And Phil's response was like, "Well, why not?" He goes, "I tell you what, you write a novel, but don't use the letter R." Well, is it difficult? It must be difficult to write for this grade level.
It very much is, and that's exactly it. Like pretty much if you can write, but you can only use 40 words, that sort of thing. You have this condensed range. You have the fact that you can't have much independence at all, or else if someone's not playing what their neighbor's playing, then they just fall apart. And so you can maybe do 2-3 things at once in that condensed range with nothing complex. 2 or 3 keys that you can use, and it's very, very, very restricting. But with time you can get there. Zeros and ones, the academic angle is that you are emulating the precision of a computer, so the students have to learn with precision to correctly interpret long versus short and loud versus soft. And every section is clearly one or the other and a combination of the two, but they should always be making note of whether they are in a short section or a long section, a loud section or a soft section, and to have that position.
And then after that, I listened to Farm and Seek, and my thought is, okay, so this is a little bit more difficult than zeros and ones. It has multiple parts, but it's also good to have multiple parts because there's options there with like your students as far as what their limitations are. It's a 3-minute piece. Again, it's a grade 1.5. The trombone parts, I said trombone parts equal good, so that was another win by you in my book. And then it's great. There's all kinds of crescendos in this piece. It's a great piece to use for exploring dynamics.
I will say that I try my best to give everyone an interesting part. Farm and Seek, it's about the moving of the dynamic, a crescendo. Come back down and expanding that range of action. And then there is a little bit more independence, as you mentioned about.
Yeah, like I said earlier when we talked in the pre-interview, I was surprised to know that you don't have a public school teaching background, because you definitely seem to be pursuing these pieces with like, I am going to use this piece to work on articulation, to work on dynamic. So you've created some nice tools for educators here.
Try to do that for sure.
And then nice segue is talking about the low brass and low reed stuff. That segues into Aluminum Sharks. It starts with that great low melody. This is a grade 2 piece. It's 3 minutes long. 3 clarinet parts, 3 trumpet parts, 2 trombone parts, 5 percussion parts with timpani. It's a fun piece. Definitely challenging at a grade 2 because it's got all kinds of dotted rhythms, an 8th note rest, just general syncopation. There's trills in the woodwinds, which I think is great because I look for ways, okay, how do I teach my woodwinds what a trill is? I believe there's even a trill like with the natural sign on it, so you have to talk about that adjustment for students. There's these long, great extended crescendos in it. There's fun dissonances. I really enjoyed listening to this one. It's one of my favorite ones, and I'm going to be ordering this one soon.
Oh yeah, I would say that it was one of the most difficult ones that I had to write. It went through probably the most number of revisions from when I started to where I ended it, and I was almost a piece where I was going to give up on it, but I was able to figure certain things out, and now it's become, like I said, one of the ones that teachers are most drawn to in my grade 2 catalog, that one, and maybe Bullet Train. And so I'm glad that I stuck through it, but there is a lot of action going on there, a lot of different kind of moods, and I hope that it is useful.
It's a good time also to talk about how the heck you come up with titles, because it's so important. Because I'll be honest, the reason I clicked on it is because it's called Aluminum Sharks, so like how grueling is that, or does it come pretty natural to you?
I do spend a lot of time on the titles, and I've had other teachers mention that, oh, good titles, I love the titles on the pieces, and I didn't know titles were a thing until the past year or two, but it is a marketing element, and you have to draw. And so if you follow in the classical tradition of, this is called Allegro, and this is called Dance in B flat, you can do that, and I did that with my first piece, but there is something about a sexy name, and I spent a lot of time coming up with it. In the case of Aluminum Sharks, the name actually is a non sequitur. It's supposed to be bizarre and unrelated, because as you go through that piece, you have these jazzy elements, you have these cinematic elements, you have these wonky, quirky elements, and all these sections that kind of don't seem to have anything to do with each other. And so I literally picked two words that have nothing to do with each other, aluminum and sharks, and put them together. And that's why it's called Aluminum Sharks, because it's just that random. So it's a random name for a random piece.
The other grade 2 piece I pulled out was The Rescue. It's a 4-minute piece. And so I maybe should have mentioned this earlier. Like, if I don't mention it, it's the instrument is because it's one per part. So there's 3 clarinet parts, 2 alto parts, 3 trumpet parts, 2 trombone parts, and 5 percussion parts with the timpani. Again, it's a great piece for working dynamics, because they're not just like a 1 measure or 2 measure dynamic shift. They're longer, extended dynamic things, and I think that's really hard for all musicians, and especially young musicians, is to pace out the crescendos and decrescendos. There's some great chromatic lines in the low brass, and you do a really great thing when you cue the solo part in all the parts, so that we can say, no, it's got to be the trumpet player this year because the flute player is way too shy.
Yeah, and there's that element, the functional element of having who can do this, but then also other teachers mentioned, like, there's a school in Wisconsin I'm working with, and they're saying, we have these horn players, and they're middle school horn players, but they actually are horn players. They can play, and they will never get an opportunity to do something like this. So we're glad that they can play a solo, because we have good horn players. And it's just an opportunity for whoever in the band can do it, or you can switch it up for different concerts. There's 4 different solos. Everyone can get their feet wet with the practice of soloing and taking control of the line and the interpretation of that line.
And next up, we're getting into your grade 3 stuff. I pulled out Love the Adventure, and I got to say, probably my favorite piece that I listened to. You add a double bass part in the instrumentation. There's 2 flute parts, oboe, bassoon. There's 2 of the flute, oboe, bassoon, alto, trombone parts. There's 3 clarinet and trump parts, 4 horn parts, 8 percussion. So it's pretty heavy scoring. It's an energetic piece. Great contrast of styles between that driving opening and then the solemn sections. The sax horn line, like, it's awesome. Like, I think it's in the middle back half of the piece. They get really, really interesting, and you're going to have some good players, I think, to cover those. I love that all the percussion parts in this one are pretty active. It's not like 40 measures of rest, and so that you don't get percussionists causing problems, because that's a real thing. Yeah, like I said, I think it might be my favorite of yours. At least it's my favorite today.
Part of the commission, the students can put in their grocery list, and the string bass player said, I want a part just for me. I don't want to play the euphonium part. I want like a string bass part. So that was actually the very first time that I wrote a string bass part for a band. And I put it in for Kobe. He's the string bass player who was there, and he asked for that. The clarinets asked for things like they wanted low, warm parts, because they're used to playing, the high, shrieky, typical clarinet stuff. They wanted something low and rich, and that solemn section you mentioned was a chance for them to feature their low register and that big unison there. And then you mentioned the 9 they had 9 percussionists. So it's going to be a world premiere, and they all wanted to be able to play. And so I created all those parts. Again, there are directions about which to omit if you like to do that or if you need to do that. Basically, this piece was written during my own personal coronavirus that happened in 2018, where I had some things go on that just kind of like wrecked my school year. They're not that interesting, so I won't go into them. But I decided, what am I going to do now that I have like this collapsed school year? So I decided to go live in Southeast Asia for a month. So I packed up and to Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and I was writing this piece in those 3 countries, along with Vancouver, BC, then a little bit in LA. And the piece Love the Adventure has to do with the fact that you're going to have these tragedies, you're going to have these things that go on in your life, but when you get to the end of your life and look back, there's a famous quote, "Someday in retrospect, the times of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful." And so I have found that in my own life when I look back to being exhausted in college when I look back to the frustrations of high school, learning instruments. Like at the time it was horrible, but when you look back, it really is a rich, beautiful time, and you would never want to have your life without that darkness to underscore the light. And so love the adventure is these things are going to happen. The coronavirus is going to happen, whatever is going to happen, but learn to love the adventure because it's going to make your life the beautiful thing that it is, and it's going to be an important part of your story. And I wrote this while I was having my own adventure.
All right, Windsor Castle is another grade 3 piece. It's 5 minutes long. There are 2 parts for the flute, oboe, bassoon, alto sax, and trombone, 3 parts for the clarinet, trumpet, 4 horn parts, 8 percussion parts with the timpani. I love the regal, majestic opening of this piece before it goes into that nice extended lyrical section. There's diversity and articulation on this piece, so it's a great piece to have if you want to work on that with your students. There's some chromaticism spread throughout. I think if I remember right, it's towards the end. I think that the ending of this piece would make this a good closer either for the ensemble or for the concert. So Windsor Castle.
Yeah, and that piece is intended as a commemoration toward Windsor Castle, and there's just different elements related to what you would imagine during a medieval castle life, from the fanfares to the jesters to the attacks to the moats and all that sort of stuff. So it's that, and the main academic thrusts in it have to do with contrasting the crisp precision of the fanfares and the majestic elements and the smooth flowing dynamically and articulationally middle parts.
Yeah.
And it's not ABA, it's back forth, so it's a little bit of a transition.
Yeah. And then going to grade 4 stuff, we had talked about Frontier Rising in an earlier conversation. So I just looked at Midnight Raid to talk about, and it's a grade 4. It's 5 minutes long. It's a full score, so it's got piccolo parts. There's a cool solo trumpet part, 5 percussion parts with timpani. It's another fun and unique piece. I see challenges everywhere, but especially in the key signature because it does go into E flat minor, and so you got to deal with that. And there's some extended 16th note runs in the woodwinds, and again, I think that's in the back half of the piece if I remember right. I'm curious when you as a composer go into E flat minor. At this grade level, is it just because it serves the music, or are you thinking about, can these kids actually handle it? Or when you're at grade 4, it's just nope, tough. That's what it is.
I definitely both. Now, you mentioned the academic aspect. I really like for students to get their feet wet in key signatures. I think it would be a shame to go all the way through high school and never play in a sharp key, never play in the key of G flat. So musically, I did want it to go there, but subconsciously, I knew that's one of the elements that I want to include. A lot of times we get stuff in mixed meter, definitely important stuff for students to learn conceptually. But the key signature thing is something that is, teachers don't want to listen to that. They don't want to listen to their students sounding like that for weeks on end before they can get that comfortable. But I do think it's important. And so I put it in there, and it's during the slower section. So it allows for more thought, and the students have more time to process each one of those notes rather than it being during those 16th note runs you're talking about. And I tried to make it all accessible in that way. So it's briefly, and it's during the slow section that they enter into that extended key. And then the 16th note runs you talk about, they're toward the end, but they are scalar, and they're during a big bombastic section, so that if students don't nail it perfectly, it just contributes to the effect of the swooshing. And so they can practice it, but it's not all reliant on them being able to do that. There are a couple of exposed trumpet things in there. So if you have a good trumpet one, that would be the one thing you want to make sure. But beyond that, a lot of the challenges can be masked within the greater context of the orchestration.
All right, and then the last piece I have is, it's not out yet, but I'm going to, as long as Darryl's okay with me saying this, you've given me the score and the audio. So I pretty much, as soon as this interview is done, I'm going to go and listen to that. It's one of those, just a great example of like how important the title and the description is. Because I was so disappointed as I read it. I'm like, oh, I want to listen to this piece, and it says, oh, it's not out yet. So X is a sci-fi scavenger hunt set in the year 3057. You already had me. First line, I was like, yep, I'm with you. Anything you'd like to talk about with this piece that's coming out?
So, you guys will get a jump on it when you hang with the one-man band show. You get the early information. So it's a sci-fi scavenger hunt, as you mentioned, and it is intended to have this very futuristic vibe. So one thing that's in there that's unusual is the flexitone. It's hard to incorporate a flexitone to me in a way that makes sense without just saying I'm using a flexitone. But it works well for this because it's kind of like the radio thing, and it's this vehicle that you can fly in, you can use on the water, you can drive, and it's kind of a, how do you say, it's a jazzy sort of swagger. So, and it gives you a low brass a chance to direct the ship, because there's some major low brass opportunities where they are featured. I am looking to expand my grade 4 catalog because I've been focusing from the bottom up. And now that I'm here, I'm going to have maybe 4 or 6 grade 3s and 4s coming out in the next weeks, and in this upcoming school year, even more than that.
Again, I just want to comment on, I've got the score for X up here. I'm just kind of, flipping through it as we're talking. Great extensive notes, very helpful to directors if they can see like some of your thoughts on percussion and teaching sections and all that stuff. So like, thank you for those extensive notes. All right, now as we close, I've got a question for you that I'm trying to ask everybody at the end of our interview, and that's, I want you to design a dream suite of 3 pieces that can come from any era of the wind band repertoire. My go-to dream suite right now when I talk to people is the Chaconne from Holst's First Suite, the Siciliano from Prelude, Siciliano, and Rondo by Malcolm Arnold, and Aurora Awakes by John Mackey. So what do you got?
All right, so for my suite, I'm going to choose Children's March by Percy Granger. I really like the vibe of that one. It's very fun, very interesting, very creative, and the orchestration is engaging. Speaking of orchestration, the second one I would choose is American Salute. And that is by, I think it's by Morton Gold, but
Yep, it is.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so it's built on When Johnny Comes Home. And what I like about that is it has so many varied sections. He takes that theme and he just like dresses it up in so many different suits. It's amazing. He does a great job. And a fun fact, I think he wrote that overnight for like CBS Radio one day, where he had to do something the next day. And I'm like, oh, just way to make everyone feel just like horrible pieces of garbage doing that overnight. Like, if you listen to that piece and you think, well, and then my third one, I had to narrow it down between Candide and Stars and Stripes. But I really love Candide, but because it's a transcription, I don't think it takes away, but I'll just choose Stars and Stripes because it's kind of classic band. And I don't think it gets enough love for the creative thing that it really is. It's a really interesting, fun, well put together piece. And that will be my third one. American Salute, Children's March, and Stars and Stripes.
Now, you had challenged me to kind of maybe reconsider how I word this question. And so I actually did, when we were talking, I made some notes. This maybe isn't final, but you reflected the question to me to say, what are 3 pieces that that I feel like people should know about that they maybe don't know about? So I'm just going to share that since you asked it and it's on my mind. I love there's a piece called December Dance by Andrew Boyson Jr. It is playful and just so fantastic. It's got one of the best sandblock parts ever written in music, like the Oh, man, I just love it. There's a piece called Malcoons, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It's by composer Lindsay Boyd. I don't think she's composed a whole lot for wind band, but it's reflective on her time in India. And so I love it as a teaching piece. It's got some of the raga stuff in it from India, some of the hand signs from playing the tabla. And then the last one, a lot more people know about this, but it's that Theme and Variations on America by Charles Ives.
Oh, oh, you're a crunchy guy, huh?
Oh my gosh. I'm not necessarily that way, but I remember playing that piece in college, and I was like, this is it. This is awesome. So, well, Darryl, I thank you so much for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to being able to work with you. Like I said, I've got a list of things I plan on ordering as soon as I get my hands on my budget. And we'll even think about, I want to be a part of commission down the road. So we're gonna talk about that at some point in time. But maybe even having one of those customization pieces done once I know what my ensembles are going to look like this next year. Because that's something I just have no idea what they're going to. Who knows? So, but anyway, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
I loved it. It's nice to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you in person someday.